on this Thursday night, sidelining sports to fight for racial justice.
It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back.
The new game plan for pro athletes demanding change. Hurricane Laura roars ashore.
I'm just glad that we are all alive.
The homes and lives turned upside down in Louisiana, and hyper high-speed connection.
I'm excited about it.
The potential rapid ride between Edmonton and Calgary.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. There are so many storms happening tonight, political, racial, and one that is actually related to weather. Division and inequality are in the spotlight, and Major League Sports are taking a stand supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, which is front and center again. On Sunday, a police officer in Wisconsin shot Jacob Blake in the back multiple times, and that has led to violent protests. The American president, Donald Trump, is vowing to restore law and order, but blames the unrest on political rival Joe Biden and local Democratic officials. And all of this is happening as a catastrophic hurricane battered the U.S. Gulf Coast. And there's still the pandemic that has killed 180,000 Americans, and in no way is it under control. We'll break everything down for you, but we begin tonight with the athletes becoming activists. Eric Sorensen has our top story.
After the NBA rocked the sports world by going dark, the reverberations have now shaken sports in this country. The NHL calling off Thursday's playoff games. The league held a moment of pre-game reflection Wednesday over racial injustice, but many believed it fell short of what the moment called for.
I don't think we should be here. I think the NHL should postpone the games. I really feel that we should be more supportive of Black Lives Matter.
The jarring halt in sports came from the NBA in its bubble. Players were willing to be isolated from COVID-19, but refused to be walled off from society's latest confrontation over race and police brutality. The Milwaukee Bucks, their city just down the road from Kenosha, where Jacob Blake was gunned down by police from behind, said basketball must halt.
Despite the overwhelming plea for change, there has been no action, so our focus today cannot be on basketball.
Others followed suit. The Toronto Raptors had been among the first to express frustration playing games at a time like this.
What are we willing to give up? Do we actually give a about what's going on?
Fred VanVleet, in particular, has always been a powerful voice.
Eric Corrine, a reporter with the Raptors, says the team was a major force for action, bringing buses into the bubble emblazoned with Black Lives Matter.
One of the most stark images of the early days of the NBA bubble. It's become to them like their voices and just speaking out aren't enough. It's time for action.
This is a human question now. It's humanity. Do we value all lives or do we only value some lives?
The NBA is perhaps the largest collective of mostly black influential athletes in the world, but they did not want their product to mask the divided culture that insulates much of America from the injustices black people endure.
It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back.
The WNBA also kneeled down and spoke up.
Just because we are basketball players doesn't mean that's our only platform. We need to understand that when most of us go home, we still are black.
There was solidarity from other sports. Some Major League Baseball games canceled. NFL teams walked out of practice. A tennis star postponed her match. Reminiscent of individual acts of courage for racial justice in the past, but this is bigger.
The largest, most widespread day of sports activism that our country has ever seen.
If not now, when?
Current and former NBAers released from play-by-play spoke from the heart.
I know people get tired of hearing me say it, but we are scared as black people in America.
By getting off the court, NBA players turned the spotlight onto America's undercurrent of racism that society too often ignores, or worse, denies. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
And protesters are back on the streets of Kenosha tonight demanding justice for Jacob Blake. Last night's demonstration was much calmer than the chaos seen early this week, and today city officials called on the community to keep protests peaceful.
The law enforcement, the National Guard, the Sheriff's Department, all of them are here to be protective and to help protect the community and to also keep protesters who are peaceful protesters safe.
Local law enforcement refused today to provide more information about the shooting and what prompted Officer Rustin Shesky to open fire on Blake. Instead, they're planning to answer questions at a news conference tomorrow. Shesky and the other officers involved have been placed on administrative leave. Civil rights activist Reverend Jesse Jackson was in Wisconsin today demanding an unbiased investigation into the shooting.
The investigation should be, and the two who watched it, they should be indicted as well. Because if Jacob had shot the police 7 times, he couldn't have gone home that night.
Come on, sir.
We need police, but not above the law.
All this drama unfolding in the U.S. is happening under the leadership of President Donald Trump. By the way, his response to the basketball boycott? People are tired of the NBA. Trump is expected to paint a rosy picture of America at the final night of the Republican National Convention. Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Proskow is following those developments. Jackson, that speech is coming from the White House. How rare is that, and what do we know about the focus of the president's speech?
Good evening, Robin. Before we get to that, we should point out that a crowd of several thousand people has started to build outside the White House in protest to tonight's speech, and the crowd is growing as we get closer to that hour. Inside the White House compound on the South Lawn, about 1,500 Trump supporters are sitting shoulder to shoulder. And you're right, it's highly unusual to have this type of overtly political speech come from the White House grounds. We should also point out there are no masks or social distancing required on the premises. The speech itself is expected to attack Joe Biden heavily. In one release excerpt, the president says he has spent the last 4 years cleaning up from Joe Biden's many decades in power. We should also point out, though, that Trump faces specific criticism for not laying out what the next 4 years under him might look like. He hasn't laid out a specific vision. And it's not clear that he's actually going to do that tonight. In fact, much of the Republican convention this week has faced heavy criticism for really glossing over the details of the everyday situations that Americans are facing right now. The pandemic, record unemployment, and of course the protests that are gripping major cities in this country. That's simply not the reality that's being presented this week, Robin.
What about the Democrats? What are they doing to counter Trump's message?
Well, this is politics, and they are counter-programming. Kamala Harris gave a speech today in which she excoriated President Trump over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. She said he was frightened and scared and hid in the worst moments. And Joe Biden has bought ads on all major TV networks tonight to air just before Donald Trump's speech. We should also point out that just today, more than 100 former Republicans, officials in the government, officials who've worked for previous Republican presidential campaigns, they came together and said they will not only endorse Joe Biden, they will actively work to get him elected.
Jackson Proskow in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. The U.S. is also dealing with a monster storm that's leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. At least 4 people were killed in one state. Laura has weakened to a tropical storm, but it roared onto the Louisiana shoreline overnight as one of the most powerful storms ever to hit the U.S. The Category 4 hurricane packed winds up to 240 kilometers an hour. It tore off roofs, knocked down trees, and cut power to hundreds of thousands of residents. Mike Armstrong reports.
Hurricane Laura slammed ashore, making landfall in western Louisiana around 1 a.m.
And look at that damage.
It was packing a punch, heavy rain and strong winds. This was shot by a storm chaser just after the eye of the hurricane passed.
Definitely some sort of mezzo vortex either just slammed me.
Laura hit land with sustained winds of more than 160 kilometers an hour. Gusts were even stronger. At least 2 National Weather Service radar stations were knocked offline. One was destroyed. They're built to withstand winds up to 215 kilometers an hour. This Weather Network reporter had a close call, showered with glass being torn off a building.
Yeah, okay. We're fine with everyone. We are fine.
In the darkness, it was hard to evaluate the damage. In the daylight, it was obvious.
This is what we're seeing. You see some down power lines, some down trees as well.
Laura left a wide trail of destruction as it headed north. The flooding was actually less severe than predicted, but those winds were not. Some areas were devastated, though the governor of Texas says his state made out better than expected, considering the size and strength of the hurricane.
We did dodge a bullet. Now, that, of course, doesn't help those whose homes have been hit.
We got a little bit lucky. It was very big, it was very powerful, but it passed quickly.
President Trump says he'll visit the region over the weekend, but for now the focus on the ground is on opening up roads and restoring power. Mandatory evacuation orders are being lifted, though some people weren't able to get out before the storm hit.
I got bumped in the head, and I'm trying to get back home. That's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's been a rough morning.
It has, and I'm just glad that we are all alive. That's it.
Now, there are shelters for people who can't make it home, but authorities aren't using gyms or convention centers due to concerns over COVID-19. People are being given hotel rooms instead. Another concern is a fire in Westlake, Louisiana. A Canadian-owned chemical plant is sending up dangerous smoke. People in the area are being told not to go outside. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
NBC's Chris Pallone is on the ground in Lafayette tonight. Chris, what's the scene like there after such an incredibly powerful storm?
Robin, I think the most remarkable thing is that the most intense part of this storm probably blew through this part of the state 14 hours ago, and we haven't seen rain in several hours. The sun is trying to peek through, but we are still getting really strong wind gusts here, sometimes even sustained winds that are pretty high. Just goes to show that as this storm right now is well on its way into Arkansas and points northward, that it's just so large. We're still in the back half of it 14 hours later.
Is there a sense that life can return to normal soon, mind you, under a pandemic?
Yeah, it depends. Well, normal is relative, right? So we're still in the pandemic, but in parts of the state, absolutely. It's really remarkable. This is the most powerful hurricane ever to hit the state of Louisiana. And if you listen to the governors of Texas and Louisiana, both of them seem to make it sound like it could have been much worse. Where this storm struck, mostly focused on Louisiana, there are certainly very, very damaged parts of the state. To be sure, there will be millions, if not billions of dollars worth of damage. There's a lot of power out, 800,000 people, Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas now, mostly here in Louisiana. It will take days, if not weeks in some places to get that power back on. But you certainly do feel a palpable sense of, this could have been worse.
Chris Pallone in Louisiana. Thanks, Chris. In New Zealand, the white supremacist who murdered 51 worshippers at 2 mosques was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Survivors and victims' families celebrated as they heard the news. The judge imposed the maximum available sentence on the 29-year-old gunman from Australia. It's the first time it's ever been used in that country. The March 2019 attacks targeting Muslims at 2 separate mosques were live-streamed by the gunman on Facebook. The massacre prompted changes to global social media protocols. New Zealand also tightened its gun laws. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister met with Lebanon's president in Beirut today. Francois-Philippe Champagne confirmed Canada is willing to commit the RCMP to help an independent investigation of the port explosion that devastated the capital. But he says it must be credible, transparent, and thorough.
We're more than happy to contribute. We've done that, as you know, in the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, but it needs to be done under conditions that will be our assistance will give faith to the Lebanese people that this is an investigation that will go to the bottom of things.
Champagne toured a World Food Program distribution center and had a first-hand look at the city's decimated port. The catastrophic explosion that ripped through Beirut on August 4th killed nearly 200 people and left thousands homeless. So far, 19 people, most of them port and customs officials, have been arrested. It's been hit after hit for Alberta. Coming up, the dire economic forecast for Wild Rose Country. Alberta released its fiscal update today, and the forecast is dire. The double blow of collapsing oil prices and the COVID-19 crisis have pushed the province to the brink. Alberta is facing its largest ever deficit and soaring unemployment. Heather Yerkes-West reports.
Casey Johnson was a young father when he started a small oil field business in 2010.
There's always an emotional component, to business. I'm really close, with my kids and, with my family. And I always, when they were little, we started the company and they just, loved hanging out with dad and his in his big trucks.
Last week, his two oldest boys posed for one final picture.
That was a really hard decision to make, to pull, the company off, life support.
After a number of difficult years in the energy sector, 2020 began with a promise for recovery.
But then everything changed in March. Alberta encountered what I would characterize as a triple black swan event.
The global economic contraction, a collapse in the price of oil, and the COVID-19 pandemic have been devastating to Alberta's economy. It's projecting the largest deficit the province has ever seen, $24.2 billion this year, up more than $16 billion from February's forecast. Revenue has fallen more than $11 billion. Unemployment is projected to hit an average 11.6% in 2020, a more than 30-year high, as the forecast shows Alberta's economy shrinking by more than 8%. The government has warned a fiscal reckoning is ahead.
Listen, stay tuned for Budget 2021. Again, we believe at a time like this, it's absolutely essential that Alberta delivers the most efficient services possible.
But no sales tax, not yet. Instead, the province wants to attract new investment to help with recovery.
Never count Alberta out.
But after 20 years in oil and gas, Johnson admits right now, for his family, he's just not sure what's next. Heather Urix West, Global News, Calgary.
The Saskatchewan government is projecting a slightly lower deficit than initially feared. The province is now forecasting a $2.1 billion deficit for this fiscal year, which is down from June's projection of $2.4 billion. Scott Moe's government says it expects to run deficits for the next 3 years before squeezing out a $125 million surplus in 2024-25. And like Alberta, the Saskatchewan government says it isn't projecting any tax increases. Still ahead, Quebec's back-to-school plan put to the test.
You're watching Global National.
Quebec's controversial back-to-school plan is being put to the test. Tens of thousands of French language students return to class today. Each class will be a separate bubble, and masks are required in common areas for kids in grades 5 and up. The government has faced criticism from groups who say the plan doesn't go far enough. Meanwhile, 3 employees at 3 different Montreal schools have tested positive for COVID-19. The school board says they were not in contact with students. Authorities in France are imposing strict new measures to try to head off a new wave of COVID-19. Face masks are now mandatory across Paris. Infections are surging in the capital and among young people. France reported more than 5,400 new COVID-19 cases on Wednesday, a level of infections not seen since the height of the epidemic in April. India has reported over 75,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. It's a single-day record and accounts for nearly half of the new cases reported worldwide. In that same period, India recorded more than 1,000 new fatalities. The government in New Delhi is pledging to double its daily tests to 40,000 a day. Retail giant Walmart has confirmed it's teaming up with Microsoft in a bid for TikTok. The parent company of the popular video app is reportedly close to an agreement to sell its Canadian, U.S., Australian, and New Zealand operations. Sources say it has not yet chosen a buyer, but a deal could be announced in the coming days. TikTok was pushed to look for a buyer after the U.S. threatened to ban the app, calling it a security threat. The company's CEO, Kevin Mayer, resigned today, saying his decision comes after the political environment sharply changed. High-speed hopes. Up next, the futuristic design for a rapid transit line in one province. It's been nearly 60 years since a cartoon family from the future introduced the world to a transit dream. Traveling by tube, Jetson style, could be a reality in Alberta. A Toronto team is pitching to build a high-speed Hyperloop between Edmonton and Calgary. Sarah McDonald looks at who's on board and who isn't.
We're designing a spacecraft that's constructed like an airplane and operates like a train.
It's futuristic transport technology that's within reach, according to the company working to bring it to Canada.
It's an aircraft without wings, so of course there's technical details and challenges to address, but overall it's using existing technology.
Toronto-based Transpod has been given the green light to study the feasibility of Hyperloops in Alberta.
It will kind of provide a much faster service.
A system that would transport people and cargo in tubes between Edmonton and Calgary at speeds of up to 1,000 kilometers per hour.
I'm excited about it. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's science fiction, but we'll never know unless we continue to do more testing.
Municipal and provincial officials publicly supporting the prospect of the privately financed multi-billion-dollar endeavor.
There's no cost to the taxpayer, and we're not in the business of writing blank checks for as yet unproven technology.
But Transport Canada has concerns the technology isn't yet fully conceptualized. A report released Wednesday casts doubt on the viability and affordability of it. The consulting firm commissioned last year to conduct its own study calls the technology potentially too pricey and too unproven to be a realistic form of transport, pinning the estimated cost for development and technology at more than twice the price proposed by Transpod.
There's many missing holes and information.
Still, Transpod plans to move forward with its own study with the support of Alberta's Transportation Ministry, with early feedback expected by next spring. The company optimistic construction could begin as early as 2025. Sarah McDonald, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is the sunset in Lockport, Manitoba. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.